What is going on, gamers and aliens? It is me, Dan, moderately anonymous Mamtg, and we have got the biggest news I think there has ever been in EDH before. We've got a brand new hot off the block ban list from the Commander RC, and it is crazy. Let's hop right into it. Dockside Extortionist banned, Mana Crypt banned, Jeweled Lotus banned, Nadu Winged Wisdom fucking banned. Out of here. This is crazy. So of course, if you've been following the cEDH and the tournament EDH scene for a little bit now, you know that we had the Commander RC thing flare up a few weeks ago in a direct response to the Commander RC saying that they did not want to do anything about the cEDH scene. They didn't want to help curate EDH for the cEDH scene. But I mean, obviously, I think that this announcement is a very big voice in the other direction here. These are obviously all cEDH specific banned cards here. Not to say that casual EDH players aren't playing any of these cards. They obviously are, and I know that it affects casual gameplay. I see people talk about it on Twitter all the time. I've had it happen to me in my own casual games before. But these are obviously staples. Like, these are tentpoles of the cEDH meta, and this is a gigantic shakeup. This is absolutely crazy. So let's get into the reasoning here. Let's go over the RC announcement. Let's check out why these things have been banned, what the RC says about it. Let's hop right into it. Before we do hop into that, actually, there's another announcement here that there is going to be a really awesome charity event happening on September 28th and 29th. That is this coming weekend as of the dropping of this video. It's going to be over on the Commander RC's Twitch stream, because I will be participating in it on Sunday afternoon. Come check that out. It's going to be a really great time all weekend. There's going to be tons of awesome people in the community who are coming to play games. So check that out on Saturday and Sunday if you're around. Now, let's hop into the cards. So to go over this little blurb here, we've got the reasoning for why we want to get rid of these cards. The philosophy of the Commander prioritizes creativity, and one of the ways we have historically reflected that in the rules and ban lists is to encourage a slower pace of game than traditional formats. This gives decks time and space to develop and do different things, and we have a goal to make it easier for players who enjoy slower, more social games to have an environment for them to explore. Commander has always had the potential for someone to get out to a fast start and be the first arch-villain of the game, but that advantage has been balanced by having multiple players gunning for them once it happens. In the past few years, notably since Strixhaven, we've seen a pattern of stronger mid-game cards, and that's leading to players who skip past the early part of the game being allowed to snowball their advantage straight through to the win. Occasional games like that are fine, but it shouldn't be common, and we're taking steps to bring the frequency down a bit by banning 3 of the most explosive cards in the format. So first, we're looking at Mana Crypt. This is a huge one. This has been a staple of the format for, I mean, the entirety of the format. I felt like right alongside Sol Ring, this has been one of those cards that is just sort of ubiquitous with the format. It's one of the reasons why you would want to play format, because there aren't other places where you can play a Mana Crypt besides Vintage now. It's going to be the very last bastion of this. So according to the doc, coming down for no mana on turn 1, it's quite possible to have an explosive start of Mana Crypt into Signet or Talisman, land, and then another Signet, leaving that player to untapping with 5 mana on turn 2. In games going 12 plus turns, the accumulated threat damage from Mana Crypt provides a reasonable counterbalance for explosive effect, but when you're snowballing to a turn 6 to 8 win, it's a meaningless drawback. Of course, we as cEDH players know that this is true. Roxai is a deck that typically tries to win on turn 2 if they can have their way. And of course, from the cEDH data project, we know that the typical game tends to end around turn 5. If you're taking even 12 or 15 damage off of your Mana Crypt, it's pretty much a meaningless drawback in most scenarios, especially when Ad Nauseam is not as strong and prevalent as it used to be. Next up, we've got Jeweled Lotus. This is another one. Obviously, this is a much newer member of the format, but one that is sort of egregiously powerful. I definitely misinterpreted how strong this card was going to be, but it certainly adds to, again, the consistency that we're talking about with Mana Crypt in the previous statement. So another card that can give you 5 mana on turn 2. Jeweled Lotus does it without even needing a good hand. Though you're restricted in what you can do with the mana, 4 and 5 mana commanders can pack a significant punch nowadays, often draw cards to make up for the one-shot mana, and defensive abilities such as Ward can't be interacted with that early in the game. Now, obviously, I am a huge fan of the Tivit, so this one like really directly affects one of my favorite decks in the format, and I kind of don't feel great about that, but these are great points. If our goal is to slow the average pace of the game down, taking away Jeweled Lotus is another great way to do it. And of course, finally, we have probably the most controversial of the group, Dockside Extortionist. This one, I know people are going to feel all sorts of ways about. I think I am personally pretty excited about this, but this is going to devastate a lot of decks. We'll get into it, but here's the reasoning that they wrote up. Dockside isn't normally quite as explosive in the early game as the other 2 cards, but it could still go mana positive on turn 2 and start generating substantial treasures after that. It's been on the border for years, and we've shied away from taking action in the past because the card is scaled well with the power levels of the table, but it's a frequent contributor to the more egregious snowballing starts. So I have just started playing Corvald again. I'm not happy to see this, but Dockside Extortionist is such an egregious member of this group, putting forward these really, as they call them, snowballed starts. Since Dockside Extortionist has come out, I have obviously played it in any deck that plays red because it is that powerful that you would play it right alongside Underworld Breach as like your staples of being in red. One of the reasons why you would want to be red, to the point where many decks are built around it. Obviously, Corvald, Sisse, which is becoming one of the most popular decks in the format right now, really relies on Dockside Emul as being one of its easiest infinite mana combos. Rogue Silas and other Grixis Plus ad nauseum piles really rely on Dockside Extortionist as being a very cheap way to farm huge amounts of mana. For some decks like Corvald, I don't think that they can survive this banning. It's true that Ruthless Technomancer exists now, and that is a somewhat feasible way that you could sort of center the deck around this different creature, but we're talking about a difference of 4 mana, and we're also talking about a difference of a card that needs setup as opposed to Dockside Extortionist. Of course, Dockside Extortionist is a conditional card in a way that Mana Crypt and Jeweled Lotus are not. We need our opponents to play out stuff early in the game to feed the Dockside Extortionist, but Mana Crypt, etc., these are all just so naturally part of the environment that, of course, our opponents are going to play them down early and quickly because that's how you get your explosive snowballed starts. So Dockside is just a card that really feeds off of that kind of environment. Now, I think that there is somewhat of an argument to be made that if we take away Mana Crypt, is Dockside Extortionist maybe a little bit less potent, but I don't think that the answer is yes, because the other card that we're banning here is Jeweled Lotus, a thing that goes directly into your graveyard. This is going to be an absolutely massive shakeup for the format, and I guess we'll keep reading on here because obviously we still have to get to Nadu, but we do have this little stipulation from the RC here. We should also talk about the elephant in the room. We are not banning Sol Ring. This, I think, is really fantastic news, and of course, they're going to get into the reasoning here, and we have no desire to. Yes, based on the criteria that we've talked about here, it would be banned. Sol Ring is the iconic card of the format, and it's sufficiently tied to the identity of the format that it defies the laws of physics in a way that no other card does. Banning Sol Ring would be fundamentally changing the identity of the format. We aren't trying to eliminate all explosive starts. It happening every once in a while is exciting, and removing the other 3 cards geometrically reduces the number of hands capable of substantial above curve mana generation in the first few turns. I think that this is very solid reasoning, and of course we're talking about how this is going to affect cEDH, so this reasoning really doesn't apply to the motives of cEDH, but we also have to admit that cEDH has always been a deviation from what cEDH is intended to be. And honestly, I love this reasoning for Sol Ring because if we look at other formats, if we look at Legacy, if we look at Vintage, they also have their staples of the format, Mishra's Workshop and Vintage, Brainstorm and Wasteland and Legacy. These are, again, as they said, a part of the identity of the format. And don't get me wrong, I think that Mana Crypt has also been a part of the identity of the format. And they do acknowledge that. They say that there are some like similar points that could be translated over to Sol Ring. But Sol Ring, obviously, I think in many ways much less egregious. And I'm happy that this, I think, is honestly a sort of healthy balance between a very explosive snowball start, as they said, and more tame and somewhat more novel experiences with just having Sol Ring. And so next up, we also have Nadu Winged Wisdom being labeled as explosive, but in a different way. Given that Nadu Winged Wisdom has been ejected from multiple formats at this point, it's no surprise that we took a close look at it in Commander. Sometimes hugely problematic cards in other formats, Oko, Companions, are fine for Commander. But our observations of Nadu suggest its inherent play patterns are going to cause problems. Part of the problem is the way in which Nadu wins, where it takes a really long time to do non-deterministic sequences that can't be shortcut and might eventually fizzle out. These aren't dedicated combo lines that you have to build a deck around. Dropping Nadu into a normal Simic shell still runs the risk of grinding the game down to a slog of resource accrual. It interacts badly with cards that are staples of casual play, most notably Lightning Greaves, means that decks where it gets thrown into without abuse intent can still create a situation where the player is monopolizing all the time in the game. That's not an experience we want to risk, so Nadu gets itself another ban. This one is kind of wild because this is one of the more preemptive bannings I think that we've ever really had in EDH. The last one that really comes to mind is Lutri. This is the only card that's ever been banned before it was officially released. But we've also had so few bannings in Commander. I think that this is probably post-release one of the shortest amount of times that a card has ever had between release and being banned. Nadu, I think, is an incredibly powerful card, and I kind of think that in a world where they weren't going to make this announcement, Nadu probably would have lived another couple years in EDH and maybe not have been banned at all, given enough time. But I think that they kind of just wanted to strike while the iron was hot and not waste their time making another announcement for a singular cards like 6 months down the line if Nadu does become really problematic. Although I think this one is probably honestly more geared towards casual commander play than cEDH in comparison to the rest of them. Nadu is obviously becoming one of the premier decks in tournament EDH right now, but it's not really problematic for an environment like cEDH, right? Like, that's not the sort of thing that we're concerned about with a deck monopolizing time. But that is very much a thing that casual commander play is concerned with. So I can understand them wanting to get rid of that for casual play. So we've looked at these cards. We've read the reasoning why they want to get them out of the format. What do I think is going to happen next? I think is a big toss-up. I think that there are going to be, obviously this is going to be a time for huge brewing. I think that some of the format staples, some of the tentpoles of the tournament EDH scene are really going to have to be readjusted. I don't know how many of them. I'm kind of worried, I think first and foremost, that Rograk Silas benefits very heavily from this. As already the strongest deck in the format, it's really relatively unaffected by these bans. Mana Crypt and Dockside Extortionist are obviously both parts of that deck and very good and important parts of that deck, but they are on the more replaceable side of the equation. Rograk Silas is already filled with cards like Culling the Weak, so many ways to cycle and reuse your free commander and make mana off of it. Dockside Extortionist, I think, is the mega easy point that once you see that in either your Ad Nauseam pile, your Necropotence draws, or a hit off of your like Underworld Breach and Undeterministic Brain Freeze, that's the point where you know you've completely made it over the hump and you're not going to have any problems anymore. So those Grixis piles are going to lose that like really easy release valve, but they still have so many options to really push their mana very hard that I don't think that this is as much of a detriment for this really toxic and problematic deck as it is for other much more fair decks in the format by comparison, I think, at this point. I wonder how well Tivit is going to be able to adapt to this now. Losing Mana Crypt and Jeweled Lotus takes a lot of the consistency away of being able to cast turn 1 or 2 Tivit, which is obviously the intention of this. But for a deck that is so commander centric and also so mana intensive on that commander, that's going to be a really big blow. As much as losing Dockside Extortionist in the format is actually a huge boon for that deck. Dockside Extortionist obviously is the bane for this artifact and enchantment based Esper deck that doesn't have a lot of great defenses against that besides cards like Blind Obedience. Maybe this adjusts the general meta in a way that Tivit can sort of take advantage of the control pieces that it already plays and ride out to more consistent like turn 3 to 4 Tivits. But again, with Rograk Silas not really losing any speed from this, I kind of think that Tivit might just be a little bit too slow. Very concerned about where that's going to be in the coming months, but I guess there's only one way to find out. We're gonna see how it turns out. I think that the biggest part of this that I'm most excited about, and I do generally think that these are really good changes for the format. I'm a little bit more sad about Mana Crypt than anything else because of, I think, just the age and how long it's been in the format. I do think it is like pretty close to Sol Ring in its status of being a tentpole of the format. But I think just like the intention of doing these bans, like they said in the beginning of this article, this is going to force a lot of creativity. I think that Jeweled Lotus and Dockside Extortionist have taken out a lot of the creativity in cEDH, and not just because they are automatic staples, but because we're running decks that have so many tutors that are so hyper focused on a specific strategy. These cards just become such a monotonous part of the cEDH play experience that I think losing them is going to lead to much more creative atmospheres and hopefully new decks that can shine in the meta. But maybe even more important than that, I think that this is going to really change the way that WotC has to think about how they publish cards for Commander, which I think is very, very important. I think that above all else, these bannings set a huge precedent of what the RC wants Commander to be like. I don't think it's been any sort of secret if you've ever read the RC announcements before. Dockside Extortionist is constantly on the watch list. Cards like Jeweled Lotus and other cards that are specifically made for Commander, made to make Commander really explosive and busted like this, they're always on the watch list because these aren't the kinds of play experiences that they want to curate for this format. So with the RC saying to WotC, hey, we don't like these cards and we're not going to let people play them in their format, This is going to obviously affect the kinds of cards that they're going to start making and putting in products that are specific for Commander now. Is WotC going to risk putting another Jeweled Lotus or a replacement Mana Crypt in their next set only to have the RC ban it and say, hey, we don't want that explosive card in our format, and then make their product like sort of unbuyable? Does this potentially push WotC to rethink how power creep works in Commander products? Does this change the way that R&D thinks about a fun Commander experience? I think most likely the answer is yes. So I understand people are going to be upset about this, and I understand that people are going to, like, obviously be in a mourning state for their favorite decks, whatever they are. RIP to the fellow Corval players, maybe to the Tivit players as well. But I think that this is really, really good for the health of EDH, and most likely for the health of cEDH as well. I'm excited to see what people start brewing. I'm excited to see people overcome new creative restrictions. If you've got a new deck list that you're working on, obviously show it to me. I'd love to see them in the comments. And let me know what you think about these bans. Do you think that they went far enough? Do you think that they went too far? Would you have banned different cards? What do you think is the most problematic card in cEDH right now? I think this is an article that raises a huge amount of questions and maybe fewer answers, but I think that this is likely the most exciting news that we've ever had in EDH or cEDH. Thank y'all for tuning in. We'll catch you next time. Be good to yourselves.